Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Football Digest. In a week when a ref nutted a judge. More on that later. On their best behaviour today, of course, Steve Bates, the chief football writer for the Sunday People, Simon Mullock, the chief football writer for the Sunday Mirror, and the Daily Mirror's man in Manchester, David McDonnell. Hi, chaps. It's been a non-stop week as usual, and we'll be looking at the Champions League action and Liverpool's much-needed win ahead of the Merseyside derby this Saturday. Big game there. We'll be looking at Manchester City's onward march. Can anyone stop them? And maybe more interestingly, the scrap for a top four place. We'll also be looking at the bottom three and asking, and I suspect hoping, that they're not cut adrift this early on. And back to Europe, we'll be looking at Kylian Mbappe and Erling Haaland. I read a quote from John Terry the other day saying that Jack Grealish and Phil Foden were the best two young players in the world. Talk about insular. I think those pair might have just given JT a nudge. And of course, there is referee Darren Drysdale sticking the head, or well, putting his head into the head of Alan Judge. But first, Steve, I'm going to start with Liverpool. A much needed win in the Champions League. Do you think they'll soon be back to the best? Do you think that their domestic form is a blip, or was this Leipzig performance maybe papering over cracks that are still there?
No, look, Andy. I think with anything, when you've got a team like Liverpool who have set such absolutely phenomenal standards the last three seasons, you're going to get a situation where as soon as they come off that level, people are going to say they've gone. You know, they need a refresh. Even Jurgen Klopp's future is called into question as well. But I think they've never been quite as bad as people have made out. It's just the phenomenal standards they've set. They have definitely dipped below that. And then, of course, you've got the situation with the injuries they've had. And, of course, at the time when they were getting the most criticism, the front three weren't really firing and clicking. They were struggling to score goals. But as we've seen over the last 2 or 3 weeks, they're back in the groove now. I mean, Salah's performance in Leipzig, I thought, was absolutely fantastic. He was just back to his best. But that whole front three are clicking again and firing. I think obviously it didn't help them that they were dismantled in such an emphatic way by Manchester City at Anfield. That really sort of was a kind of a headline moment for them, if you like. And people said, well, you know, where's the Liverpool that we've come to expect over the last 3 years? But I think City were so good and are so good at the moment that I think it was just merely a question of just magnifying the problems that they've got. But I think, you know, we saw in Leipzig that they are really a truly superb team still. And when you think that you've got in the back four still Jordan Henderson, who let's face it, is a central midfield player. He's not a defender. But you know, Leipzig sorted out Man United over in Germany earlier this season in the Europa League, but they hardly had a sniff against Jordan Henderson and a makeshift Liverpool defence.
Sam, I just want to pick up on something that Steve said there about there was even questions about Klopp's future. Now, I don't know about you, but and this is probably a lot of my mates where they live and who they support. But last Saturday night, I mean, my phone just kept going and going saying, has Klopp quit? Mates, friends, family, the office. But you know, I mean, all I kept getting was, has Klopp quit? And I'm replying to you saying, no, where have you got this idea from? Next minute, people are texting me saying, oh, the bookies, he's now the favourite. Well, I said I wouldn't take much note of that. And I'm saying to him, no, it's not happening. But all the time, the phone keeps beeping, has Klopp quit? You know, I guess it's the age we're living in, but where did these rumours come from? Why were these rumours going around?
Well, do you know what, Dunny? It was the same for me. I actually got a text while the game was still going on at the Etihad. We were at the Etihad on Saturday night for the City Spurs game. And I got a text off a friend who is in an horse racing syndicate that includes, I won't mention the guy because it's unfair, but it includes a former player who is a big Liverpool fan. And it was he had put this in this WhatsApp group that Klopp had walked out after the Leicester defeat. And I didn't really think anything of it. I just thought it was kind of, you know, it was these kind of rumours that sometimes do the rounds after a big defeat and when a club's going through a difficult patch. But by the time I got home from the Etihad, like you say, my phone was pinging left, right, and centre about rumours. So I thought, look, I'm going to have to check this out. So I actually rang the sports head and said, look, there could be a big story developing here this one text that I got a few hours ago has now turned into a flood of texts. And I rang Matt McCann, the Liverpool press. Well, I didn't ring him. I texted him. I said, Matt, look, I'm sure you're aware there's a lot of rumours going round. I'm sure you've had texts from other people. What's the situation? And Matt, to be fair to him, was back to me within about 30 seconds saying, look, absolute rubbish. Jurgen's going nowhere. Don't worry about it. And I was like you again. I was watching the odds tumble on the next manager to leave a Premier League club. And initially, Roy Hodgson was favourite, followed by Jose Mourinho. And very quickly, I think Klopp fell from about 25 to 1 to evens. And I think at one point, you might not have even been able to get a bet on him.
Probably not.
So clearly, the market had been affected by this, sort of rash of rumours that just suddenly started going round after Liverpool had lost 3-1. But like I say, the press officer was very good in terms of putting my mind at rest that it wasn't anything too serious.
I mean that's fascinating the way that works. I mean, what I would say, to anyone out there, what I would say is that these rumours can just gather momentum, whatever. Generally, though, without blowing our own trumpets, generally newspapers do break these type of stories, and I would say that if you hear it from there, and you hear it from a newspaper man, then it tends to be right. And again, well, maybe I'm blowing our own trumpets, but that's what normally happens. As I say, this gathered momentum last week. Dave, what I would say about Klopp is that clearly one of the reasons maybe these rumours come into circulation is because they've been on a bad run, because he's been on 2 or 3 years of incredibly high, intense, successful football, and the natural thing to do is to put 2 and 2 together and actually come up with the idea that you can't keep this going for forever and ever. Now, I personally think that he'll see out his contract till 2024 and that he'll then leave, maybe in charge of the national team, depending on the circumstance of the national team at that point. But do you understand why people are sort of saying, well, how long can this go on for? How long can Klopp keep this intensity going? How long can his players keep it going for him? Can you understand why people might speculate about his future?
Yeah, of course I can. And I thought it was interesting this week. We spoke to Pep Guardiola about it. And he said he had some sympathy for Klopp. Of course, they've both lost their mothers in the past year. Guardiola last year to coronavirus and Jurgen Klopp more recently. And of course, he wasn't able to return to Germany to attend his mother's funeral because of the travel quarantine restrictions because of the coronavirus between UK and Germany. And of course, Jurgen's behaviour has been pretty erratic in interviews. He's been pretty spiky, as you'd expect, I guess, given the run that Liverpool have been on. So I think if you add all these things into the mix, the personal anguish, the professional issues with Liverpool not performing and not having hit the standards that they've hit in recent seasons, people are going to put 2 and 2 together. People are going to speculate on his future. But he was fairly emphatic when he came out and said, "Look, it's a challenge. It's a new challenge, but one I'm up for, and one I'm going to take head on." But going back to Guardiola, it was interesting because, of course, he had that sabbatical, didn't he? After Barcelona, he took a year out. I think he lived in New York for the best part of a year. Had to recharge his batteries. He said he was physically, mentally, emotionally drained. I think that was probably a lot to do with the politics of managing Barcelona. I think he's got a lot more freedom. He's not bogged down by that kind of thing at Manchester City. But he needed a year out from the stresses and strains of management after Barcelona, and then came back obviously at Bayern Munich for 3 years. So I think sometimes possibly we underestimate the pressure that managers are under. And I think really, it is a high-pressured environment they're in. We see that in these post-match interviews. Sometimes they lose their cool, and that's understandable. So I can see where these rumours come from about Klopp, but they were fairly swift to shut them down at Liverpool.
Yeah, and I agree. I think it's when we talk about pressure, it's easy. Sometimes it's easy for people to say, "Oh, what do you mean pressure? Yeah. Pressure is this, and pressure is that, and pressure is putting food on the table. Pressure is working in the NHS." And I agree. Of course, it's incomparable. All those things are far more pressure than being highly paid to be involved in football. But having said that, there is pressure. And remember, if you speak to Klopp and any high-profile manager like that, but Klopp in particular, I remember talking to him and saying, he can't do the normal things. He cannot. I mean, none of us can go out for a pint now, by the way, but actually in normal times, remember them when you could go out and get. But he can't do those things. He's immediately recognisable, and he's away from home. He's away from his family. his family are still, the Broad family, that is, are in Germany. His mother's passed away in Germany. I understand that, and it's an all-consuming job. Everyone wants a piece of Klopp, so I understand why those pressures will be there. And Steve, there'll be more pressure. Is it Saturday? Liverpool Everton. I mean, they don't tend to slip up at Anfield against Everton, but this one now sort of brings on. If never mind the Leipzig results, they've lost 3 on the spin in the Premier League. We never saw that coming. They've lost home games to Brighton. Obviously, to City is excusable, but big game this for Liverpool and for Everton.
It's a massive game, yeah. I mean, given the history of the fixture and being in Liverpool's favour, and to be honest, the way that they have been rediscovering their form the last couple of weeks, I would still expect them to win the Mersey derby. Obviously, City had a chastening experience at the hands of City last night. Didn't play too badly, to be fair, but they were just absolutely kind of swamped and suffocated by City. So probably that was a difficult game to judge Everton on. But they're going to probably face the same kind of Klopp game plan on Saturday at Anfield, where I'm sure he'll be absolutely intent on going for it from the first whistle. I can only see personally a Liverpool win on Saturday, but I think it's interesting that people have written them off, and people are now even speculating whether they'll make the top 4, which is just I think it's quite ludicrous, really, because if ever a club's able to put a run together, then it would be Liverpool, and I fully expect them to be challenging for a top 4 place come the end of the season, because we've got left about 16, 17 games left. So I'm absolutely certain they'll do that. But there is pressure there, especially on the back of that poor run in the Premier League. But I think things have been magnified with Liverpool, as I said before, because of the outstanding levels they've hit. And let's be fair, they are having difficulties. But I've seen sort of certain signs within the way certain players have emerged. I mean, Curtis Jones, for instance, looks better and better and better every time I see him. What a good young player he is. And I do think it's a bit of hysteria to suggest that Liverpool aren't going to make top 4 or might not even make Europa League, which is what some people were speculating.
Might be relegated later on. Hey, no, but I tell you what, Steve. I mean, you say hysteria, and Simon, is it really that far fetched that they won't finish top 4? We'll come on to City, and I want to come back to Everton as well in a minute. But Steve brought up the top 4. Well, hang on a minute. Thomas Tuchel. Just by the way, Frank Lampard's sacking was written by a newspaper reporter, if I remember rightly. I think it was Matt Law from the Telegraph, just to say which rumours to believe. But Thomas Tuchel seems to have hit the ground running at Chelsea. Leicester flying for the most part. Manchester United doing well. So is it really that hysterical to suggest that that Liverpool might not face a battle to finish top 4, Simon?
I thought forget the result at Leicester. If you look at that first 70 minutes, I thought that was Liverpool probably pretty close to their best. I think the one worrying thing that we've never seen before with Liverpool under Jurgen Klopp is the way they crumbled against City after that second goal, and the way they crumbled after Leicester equalised, which was very un-Liverpool-like. And I think that would be a big worry more than their actual form. And even if you look at the Leipzig game, the 2 goals came from glaring mistakes, defensive mistakes. It wasn't as if Liverpool dominated, no question, but it wasn't as if they were sort of creating chance after chance. And they got the breaks. And like Steve said earlier, Salah was lethal, and Mane produced practically an identikit finish to the first goal. So I think that was a big result for Liverpool in midweek. I think that really kind of eases the pressure. And after their kind of recent huge dip in form, particularly at Anfield, after going 68 games unbeaten there, what better way for them to get back on track than a game against their local rivals? I think I was actually at Goodison at Anfield the last time Everton won there. I think Kevin Campbell scored. I think it was 99, 98. an awfully long time ago. So Everton will go there thinking that they're due a performance and a result against Liverpool at Anfield. So I think it could be quite an intriguing game. For me, if I was Carlo Ancelotti, I'd try and stay in the game or if I was Everton, try and stay in the game as long as possible, and hope that those kind of nerves that Liverpool have shown at home in recent weeks start to fray again.
Yeah, I mean, Dave, after last night's game, I mean, Ancelotti sort of points to the fact that they've got a decent record on the road this year. How much that matters now with no crowds, I'm not sure. But they've got a dreadful home record recently. And, that defeat last night, okay, that one was expected. But, you're being beaten by Fulham, you're being beaten by Newcastle. Is Ancelotti getting a little bit of a free pass at the moment?
Yeah, possibly, because of his reputation. And I think possibly because of the way that Everton started the season. They started so well. They've made some excellent signings. They sorted out the midfield. Calvert-Lewin's been scoring for fun. James Rodriguez had a great start. He's kind of tailed off a little bit. They've had injuries, of course, which has really, knocked them a little bit, I think. So there is mitigation on that front. But yeah, possibly getting a free pass to a certain extent. But I think that they're probably where they deserve to be at the moment in the league. I think the best they could probably hope for is Europe place. I think top four. I've talked about when they were flying high at the start of the season, but I think in reality the league sorts itself out as it has done in recent weeks, with obviously Liverpool being the exception. But teams are where you'd expect them to be, really. But I think Simon said he's certainly due a performance there. Everton's due a performance there at Anfield. And I think away from home, as you say, it might suit them. It may well suit them, and I feel that they will feel that Liverpool's sort of vulnerability at Anfield in recent weeks is something they can potentially exploit.
I think Everton, Donny. I think Everton fans, will be absolutely desperate to get Dominic Calvert-Lewin back in that team on Saturday. He's missed the games against Fulham and City. They've lost both of them. I'm not saying that's a coincidence or whatever, but he showed against Manchester United recently. I think a couple of us were there for that. I think we were all probably there for that game against Everton when they came back, Everton late on and scored. But Calvert-Lewin is exactly the type of player that will give Liverpool's defence nightmares, really, if they can get the proper service to him at Anfield on Saturday, and he does make it and he is fit again. He will be exactly the type of player that Liverpool will just not want to face. And as I say, if they can get some proper service into him, if he does play, then I'm absolutely certain that they will definitely, without a doubt, cause Liverpool problems in that makeshift back four.
Yeah, but you know what, Steve, that actually sort of reminds me of something in a way. I totally agree with you about a reliance on Calvert-Lewin, and it has to be an over-reliance on Calvert-Lewin. Hang on a minute, this was a guy coming into the season who wasn't the player that he is now. Let's face it. It's probably only since the first lockdown that Calvert-Lewin has blossomed, and you're relying on who is still from age, I wouldn't say raw, but he's still learning his craft. And Marcel Brands, I think the director of football, is about to sign a new contract, or is going to commit his future, and has had a lot of sort of praise for what he's done there. But to me, Everton have left themselves, over-reliant on Calvert-Lewin. And one of the ironies, I think, that everyone will be looking at and thinking, who's that playing for PSG? What happened to Moise Keane at Everton?
Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking the same when I was watching it.
It looked like he barely kicked the ball when he put the blue of Everton on. Who's now pulling up trees next to Kylian Mbappe at PSG? I don't know how many goals he scored this season, but I think it's double figures.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, what happened there? What went wrong there? And if Ancelotti can't get the best out of him, then I don't know. I just find it one of those odd situations. Maybe he's just more suited to Paris than Liverpool.
Listen, Donny, he's playing in a forward line that includes Mbappe and Neymar, True. So I think that might have something to do with it.
Yes,
rather than Richarlison and Calvert-Lewin. But listen, I get what you're saying. He definitely, Evertonians will be looking at that thinking, why didn't we get that out of him? But clearly he's thriving in that kind of environment there. And there's no doubt about it. His goal record is very good since he's been there. So, but I think Evertonians, when I watch Richarlison, you always seem to want more from him. There's a deadly player in there, but he doesn't always kind of produce it, and it's a bit of a frustration, I think, not only for Evertonians, but I would also imagine for Ancelotti, because there's definitely Calvert-Lewin and Richarlison should be an absolutely formidable partnership, but they don't seem to have quite clicked properly. And I think there's this kind of uncertainty about where Richarlison's best position is. Is it coming off the left? Is it down the middle as a number 9? He can't really play there because Calvert-Lewin, that's his position, and he does it very well. He scored 18 goals already this season in that position, so you're not going to shift him. But yeah, listen, it's a conundrum for Ancelotti.
Talking of conundrums, Simon, Pickford or Olsen?
Pickford for me. Still, I think he's a better keeper. I was at the Man United Everton game a couple of weeks ago, and I don't think Olsen covered himself in too much glory that night. I just think, I know Pickford's going through a difficult time. He's just come back from injury against City. Thought he should have saved the 3rd goal last night because he got a strong hand to it and couldn't keep it out. But I still think Pickford, from what I've seen, and I can only go off what I've seen, I think Pickford just is the man with the shirt at the moment.
Let's actually, now we digress on keepers. Let's stay down that path. Dave, Henderson or De Gea?
Now that's the $1 million question, isn't it?
Well, I mean, I'm asking you, pal.
Well, I've advocated Henderson. I think that this is not just a blip from David De Gea. This is a malaise, that started last season and potentially the season before that. Capable of brilliant moments, shot-stopping moments, great save that almost makes people forget the errors and reminds them of how good De Gea is. But we've said this for years, and people have said this for years. He doesn't command his area. He's not brave. I mean, Simon just mentioned the 3-3 draw between United and Everton at Old Trafford a week or so ago. We were both at. I mean, De Gea was at fault for two of the goals there. Certainly the first one and the third one. I think there is a decision there for Ole Gunnar Solskjaer to make. I expect Dean Henderson to play tonight in the Europa League, as he has done, and he's obviously played in the FA Cup. But he's come back from a very successful loan spell at Sheffield United, not to sit on the bench. I think he's been very bullish about that. I think some of you guys did an interview with him on England duty at the start of the season, where he said precisely that. I've come back to be number 1. I've not come back to challenge that. I've come back to get that jersey myself. And I think United probably, hoped that having Henderson back would kind of help De Gea raise his game. Because let's be honest, he's been unchallenged as Man United's number 1 for the best part of the decade. I think you have to go back to Anders Lindegaard, when De Gea signed for the last time. He lost his place. Okay, he's been in and out the side at the start, but he's been largely undisputed number 1 for a decade. So I think he's now become a liability rather than an asset. And I think as much as Ole Gunnar Solskjaer says every player has to earn his place and sort of champion this so-called competition in his squad, that doesn't seem to apply to David De Gea. And I do feel that is kind of undermining Solskjaer's rhetoric, and it's undermining this whole belief or the suggestion that players have to earn their place on merit, because at the moment De Gea doesn't deserve his place on merit, and Henderson does. So I think if you're going to stick by that principle of every player has to earn their place, then Henderson deserves the shout.
Yeah, I agree with Dave. I think I don't think there is a decision to be made as far as De Gea and Henderson is concerned, because Ollie's been steadfast in his insistence that if you're the man with the shirt and you're the man in form, then you get the nod. Now, they brought Henderson back. They talked him up that he was the future of the club. They put him on a new contract that's reportedly worth £100,000 a week. That is a big statement to make if you're not then going to give him a chance when your number 1 is making as many mistakes as David De Gea is making. I don't think there's a decision to be made. I think they've got to give Henderson the chance that they promised him when he came back to the club in the summer.
Yeah, I think you're right, Sam. I think when David referenced that interview that we did with him when he was on England duty, he probably said a little bit too much. And we were slightly surprised that he committed himself with a new contract to Manchester United, knowing, as we know, that David De Gea we thought was pretty irreplaceable. But he seemed to come across in that interview almost as though, he didn't say as much, but the impression I came away with was that he'd been given some guarantees that he would, there's no point in him coming back and not being number 1. He wants to be with England at the Euros. And the Euros are in June. And at the moment, okay, that's a whole new discussion at the moment, the England goalkeeping situation, because there's no one really putting themselves forward to challenge Pickford. However, Henderson seemed to be under the impression that he would get more of a chance. And I'm intrigued. Imagine the whole goalkeeping thing at the moment, I could go on either or. I could say, Steve, Mendy or Kepa at Chelsea, because now Tuchel brought Kepa back in for a Premier League game. What's this thing with rotating keepers?
Yeah, he did. I think, listen, Kepa was on his way out under Frank, wasn't he? There's no doubt about that. I think if there'd have been a window nearby when Frank
He'd have thrown him out of it.
He would have chucked him out of it, despite, paying, 70 million for him or something? But yeah, listen, it just does show you that Hugo Lloris at Tottenham, he's another keeper that's in the spotlight at the minute. But
Hugo Lloris or Joe Hart? There you go.
Yeah, well, exactly. Well, Joe Hart of 5 years ago, maybe, but
Alisson's the biggest one at the moment. He's going through a crisis,
Well, exactly. I'm sorry, Steve, but Simon, you mentioned that before about Liverpool collapsing after late on against City and against Leicester. But let's face it, they collapsed, but the goalkeeper collapsed. The goalkeeper collapsed. I had this. I'm watching that game on TV, Leicester Liverpool. And I'm hearing the discussion amongst commentators and summarisers saying, "Oh, well, there's a lack of communication there, understandable a lack of communication between the new centre half and the goalkeeper." I'm like, no, it's just the goalkeeper's fault. It's never been more of the goalkeeper's fault than that.
Even in the Leipzig game, one of Alisson's great strengths is when the ball's at his feet. He's great at playing the ball out from the back. How many clearances he sliced out of touch in the Leipzig game? So you could tell he's still been affected by what's been happening over the last few weeks. I think that clean sheet in the first leg will have done him, will have done his confidence a great deal of good. It was just what he needed after what he's experienced in the last few weeks. Because let's be fair, he's been absolutely quality since he's come over.
Yeah. I mean, Steve, you sorry, mate, to interrupt you, but you brought up Hugo Lloris. It didn't help that, in contrast, at the other end of Hugo Lloris last Saturday, you have Ederson, who not content with making certainly one good save from Gareth Bale, then pings an 80-yard assist for Gundogan. And it just seems to me, when we're discussing Manchester City, one of the things that strikes me just observing is that this year Ederson seems to be at his best, and in keeping with the defence. I don't know whether it's my imagination, but he seems to maybe not take as many risks. He's doing the basics right, which City defensively are doing right. They have a unit now, whether or not slightly interchangeable as it was last night with Laporte coming in for Stones and Walker and Cancelo as fullbacks. Zinchenko might come in, but they look as though they've got a pretty organised unit. And I think Ederson's an important part of that. Do you sense that he has maybe just scale back a little bit on the extravagance?
I don't think he's ever been a goalkeeper where you've got your heart in your mouth with him because his distribution is so good. I don't think there's probably a better keeper in the Premier League with the ball at his feet. I think he is the number one, even ahead of Alisson for me. Ederson's always been very, very good. Listen, every goalkeeper done it is going to make a mistake. They're all going to do it. Doesn't matter who you are. The best do it. They always do it. But you're at particular risk when you try to play out of goal. I mean, there's no goalkeeper that is an accident waiting to happen more than the Leeds goalkeeper, the young kid who sort of tries to play out, and even if he concedes one, the next moment he'll be trying to play out. Now, I think when you've got managers like Bielsa and Guardiola and Klopp who give you the responsibility and the license and the freedom to play that way, then that's absolutely fine, because those good goalkeepers have been told to play that way, and Pep's not going to change the way he plays. But I do agree with you, the defence at City has had a massive impact on Ederson. I mean, I think, buy of the season must be Ruben Diaz. I mean, he's just brought stability, assurance, calmness, everything you like to that Manchester City defence. And of course, we've seen the emergence of John Stones again, which has been great for Guardiola and himself and City fans as well. So there is an absolute now complete calmness and stability about that defence. And you look at Liverpool, I think 17, 18 defensive partnerships in front of Alisson. That can't help, can it? It can't do. And I think there's a similar case at Manchester United where Ole Gunnar Solskjaer does chop and change. Maguire's always the constant, but he chops and changes between Lindelof, Bailly, Tuanzebe. I think the best teams are always have a foundation of a centre-back pairing. go back to Ferdinand and Vidic back in the day. If you've got those two central defenders in front of you who stay there week in, week out, you're not going to have many problems. But once you start chopping and changing, as managers do, and I understand the reasons they're doing it in the particular football landscape and the global landscape we're in at the moment, I can understand that. But just going back to City, I think, there's no surprise that City's surge of form and resurgence, and obviously I think they're going to go away and run away with the title now, maybe by 20 points, I don't know, but certainly they're with a big advantage. I think you can't sort of you can't break the link between that and the defence.
Yeah, sorry, Dave.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, adding to what Steve said on Ederson, after the 3-0 win over Tottenham last weekend, City's win, I asked Guardiola, I said, look, you've worked with some incredible goalkeepers, Victor Valdez at Barcelona, Manuel Neuer at Bayern Munich. How does Ederson compare to them? Hoping he'd say he's the best. Now, he was very diplomatic. But what he did say, and this endorses what Steve was and what we've all just said, was that he's the best of those three, the best he's ever worked with the ball at his feet. His distribution is second to none. And we saw that, we've seen that with the assists last weekend and the calmness that he brings to the defence. So I just thought it was interesting, Guardiola actually saying, by far and away, he has the best feet of any keeper he's worked with.
Yeah. You described though, Simon, that he is going through, Ederson, just a whole calm period in his career.
Yeah, although I'm absolutely certain that he wants to get on a penalty. City have had their problems with pens, and I'm absolutely sure, because his big hero was a Sao Paulo keeper called Rogério Ceni, who I think scored about 150 goals in his career. He used to come out and take penalties and free kicks. And that's why he's so good with his feet, is because when he was growing up in Brazil, that was the goalkeeper that he most wanted to be like. So he practiced with the ball at his feet as much as he did keeping it out of the goal. But yeah, he does look calm. And I think Steve's absolutely right about what he said earlier. That is because he's got a defence in front of him that just looks absolutely rock solid at the moment. Diaz has been absolutely fantastic. John Stones is back to his best. People are talking about maybe Gundogan being player of the year at the moment, or Diaz. I think Cancelo has been absolutely fantastic. I mean, what a footballer he's become this season. A right back or a left back that pushes into central midfield and just doesn't look out of place there. And I think the thing that City have got now, which is what Guardiola has wanted throughout his time at the Etihad, is, he mentioned it last week, there's no Ronaldo, there's no Messi yet, there's no Mbappe. They've just got a pure team where everybody just fits into that plan. We just seen the rotation last night where Laporte came in, where Kyle Walker came back in. On Saturday it could be Mendy coming back in, it could be Zinchenko coming in, Gundogan, and the interchangeability there is just absolutely incredible, given that there was so little preparation time in the summer, and Guardiola doesn't get that time on the training field that he really kind of is precious to him to set the team up. So I think City are in a really good place at the moment.
They're in a great place. I think what struck me as well last night, just by looking at the personnel and looking who came on, looking who was on the bench, and if you think really, top of my head, there's probably only Gundogan at the moment, and that isn't serious, clearly. I mean, they have got such a good bill of health. I mean, that does help, coming into the middle of February, towards the end of February, when the Champions League is starting again, and the cup competitions, they're still in. Then that's going to be important. You looked at that squad yesterday and you thought, he could put two teams out there that could beat Everton last night. And Everton are a decent side.
I think the only player that's out at the moment, Andy, is Nathan Ake. I mean, Gundogan's obviously got the groin problem, but a player that they spent £40 million on, who people expected to come in and play a role because John Stones looked to be, sort of surplus to requirements or a squad player at best. And they've even got Ake to come back in. It's an incredible strength and depth that Guardiola's got.
And Donny, who would have thought that City would ever get to a point where they don't miss Sergio Aguero?
Well, yeah, exactly.
Or De Bruyne.
Or De Bruyne, exactly. Well, that's just because, sheer quality of numbers. Simon says So I would say that about them not having, like Pep said, a Ronaldo or an Mbappe or, someone like that. But they have got, high quality players, many, many, many of them, haven't they? So that helps at this time of year. So now Sam has brought it up. He did say, I heard him say, no Messi yet. So one, will they get him? And two, after everything Sam has just said, why do they need him? Anyone on that one?
Well, I spoke to Paulo Zabaleta last week about Messi, and Zabaleta is now living back in Barcelona. He's big friends with Messi and has been since their youth team days in Argentina. And he said, "Look, honestly, I don't know what Messi is going to do." And he even mentioned that he could stay at Barcelona and be a one club man. But he said, "My advice to him would be that if he wanted a new challenge, it had to be the Premier League, because there is still, City running away with the league at the moment. Yeah. There is still that kind of challenge of what is still the toughest league in the world. So does he take that option, or does he go to Paris Saint-Germain, or does he stay with Barcelona? That's a decision that I would imagine became a lot easier for him to make after they were thumped by PSG in midweek, because Barcelona look a million miles away from the team they were. How long is it going to take Ronald Koeman or the next man to rebuild that squad, given the apparent lack of funds at the club at the moment?
I mean, I don't know where. I just don't know where they would find the money, though, to particularly in a pandemic, to pay for. I know if anybody can, it'd be City, but finding the money to finance Messi's not just his wages, but signing on fees, his entourage, everything. It would be an absolutely huge financial commitment for a player who's 34 and who some people might say, maybe. Well, his best days are clearly behind him, that's for sure. They're not in front of him. But I suppose it would make perfect sense for City if he could get him over the one hurdle that they need to get over, which is Champions League. I mean, they may well win the Champions League this season, City, so they wouldn't need him at all then, would they? Well,
exactly. And also, I think, Dave, that we talk about, it's not quite the old chestnut of could he do it on a cold, windy night in Stoke. I mean, he won't have to, because I don't think Stoke are coming up, are they? So, but
give him the cup.
Yeah, he'd be rested for that. But they could, but he is, as Steve mentioned, he turns 34 in June. We know the way City play. I mean, you only have to watch the game last night and the intensity, how they play with and without the ball. I'm not saying he's, it'd be fantastic to have him here. But really, can you see it happening? And can you see? I mean, what would be the exact point? I know that sounds like a ridiculous question, like where did it all go wrong type question. But what would be the exact point of having Messi in Manchester City when they're blazing a trail again this season?
Yeah, but you always want to add quality to the squad. Yeah. Of course, Aguero is not going to go on forever. If you have a chance to sign arguably the best player of all time, you're going to take it. You're going to take it. And as Steve said, and as Simon said, if there's one club that can afford to do it, it's Manchester City or PSG, of course. Of course they would want to sign him. You might only get 2 or 3 seasons out of him, but I mean, what 2 or 3 seasons would they be? He's still. Like Ronaldo, I think it was Messi 35 now, 34, 35. Ronaldo's just turned 36.
Well, he's 33, Messi. I think he turns 34 in June.
Yeah. Well, so he's a couple of years younger than Ronaldo, who's still in incredible physical condition. Neither of them have suffered great injuries throughout their career. So you'd expect that Messi's got maybe 2 or 3, certainly 2 years at his peak, really. To still offer. Manchester City, and of course commercially it would make sense as well. Not just from a point of view, commercially the deal would pay for itself. So I think it's a no-brainer for Manchester City, and of course the City hierarchy, as the guys will know as well, have made no secret of the fact that they have an alliance with Messi from his Barcelona days. Manchester City, they've made it known privately that if Messi ever left Barcelona, Manchester City is the club that he would come to. Now, of course, PSG obviously entered the fray, and there's the opportunity of him, playing up front alongside Neymar again, being reunited with him and playing alongside Kylian Mbappe. What a front three that would be. So he has options, obviously, but I think City would certainly try and pull out all the stops to sign Messi, even though, as you say, they are running away with the title, and they may win the Champions League this season. Could you imagine what 2 years next to Phil Foden would do, next to Messi would do for? Absolutely. In terms of his development, it would be incredible. So, yeah, I think for me, it's a no-brainer for City. If they can get in, they will do everything they can to do so.
Can I just say something as well? It's not just Manchester City we're talking about here. You're talking about the City Football Group. Messi could quite easily play 2-3 years in the Premier League and then go and play in New York for another 2 or 3 years. What would that do to the MLS, for example? So City have got that in their locker as well. It wouldn't just be maybe a 2 or 3 year deal. It could be a 6-year deal. So you spread the cost of that over 6 years, and suddenly it doesn't become. It's not as prohibitive as maybe it is if you're talking about in the final 2 years of his career.
Sam, you took the words out of my mouth there. I was going to mention. I think I read somewhere, might have been this morning, about more City Football Group links. I think with a club in Bolivia and another French club. I think. I can't remember. Maybe anyway, but a couple of clubs that they form more links with, and clearly the City Football Group is the big thing. And I think you're right. I think never mind what Messi would take, that group to a whole new level in global recognition, which I'm sure is what they're after. But lads, I think we would agree that there's probably not much point in discussing whether or not City are going to win the title, because I think we'd all agree that they are going to win the title this year. Other end of the table. There was another game yesterday, Burnley-Fulham. I finished 1 each. A couple of quick goals inside quick succession. Do we see Fulham as the only one of those bottom three, Steve, who might make a run at basically pulling another couple of teams, maybe Newcastle, maybe Palace, into the mix?
Well, they're closer to them, aren't they? I mean, you'd say Sheffield United, West Brom. While not adrift, they're certainly 1 or 2 more defeats for them, and they're definitely going to be adrift. There's no doubt about that. Fulham seem to be the team that could maybe claw back. What we've got 14 games left. So what's that? 42 points to play for. Fulham are 6 points at the moment off Newcastle, 7-8 off Brighton, Burnley. So it's not a huge gap to pull back, and there is always a team that kind of goes into free fall. I think at the moment you'd be worried about Crystal Palace, the way they're kind of plummeting a bit under Roy Hodgson. They seem to be in a real kind of downward spiral. But I think Fulham have shown absolute brilliant character, bravery to keep playing the football they're playing, because they're playing some really attractive football. Scott Parker's doing a superb job there, I think. And I think if there's one team that probably deserves to get out of it in the bottom three because of the style of play and because of what they bring, then it would be, for me, Fulham. But, the teams above them are catchable, definitely. But as I say, you're always going to get a team that's going to have a bad last 4, 5, 6 games of the season. And as long as Fulham can stay in touch and in contact with those sort of 4, 5, 6 teams above them, I think they've got a real fighting chance.
I think that's a good point in the Fulham. It was so important for them to get that win at Goodison, and indeed to get the points at Turf Moor, because I covered the game. I remember doing the game down at Craven Cottage when they were beaten by Chelsea by a 1-0, and they played very well, and they were probably the better team in that game until the fullback, the wing back, Robinson, was sent off, for a ridiculous challenge, and then even then with 10 men they played well. But I got the impression then that Scott Parker was fed up doing the same interview. It was a replica after every single game. We played well, we didn't win. We played well, we didn't win. We created stuff we didn't convert. And I think it was important they got that win at Goodison Park. And they seem the side, as you say, that might be able to actually put some wins together. I don't see Sheffield and West Brom actually putting many victories together, So that's the issue. Fulham can score goals. There are goals in Fulham, and I think, and you're right when there's teams above them may be vulnerable. Now, you mentioned Palace, and what do any of these teams do, Dave, if they do keep sliding, say the likes of Palace?
Yeah.
Now, I won't go down the Newcastle line because I think we've been down the line. Will Bruce, what will happen to him? But more interestingly, I think there's sort of a growing sort of discussion about whether or not Palace would, in the event of a succession of defeats, make a change of manager. Would they think about changing their manager sort of at this stage of the season?
Well, certainly they are vulnerable, aren't they? When I was I was at the Burnley-Fulham game last night, and the way, as Steve said, the way Fulham have played in recent weeks, they've drawn too many games. I think they've drawn 10 this season. So, they haven't been able to convert those into wins. But I think they played Sheffield United, obviously, at the weekend, and then I think they played Palace after that, if I'm right. So, they can certainly drag Palace into it. Now, listen, Roy's done a great job at Palace, but, they've been bad in this towards Zaha and the creativity, the enterprise that he brings, and without him they look pretty bereft and one-dimensional. Of course, any team that loses 3-0 at home to Burnley, you've got to ask serious questions about. Burnley have scored, I think they scored 5 goals on the road all season before that. So I think there is a question there if Palace do slide. I can't see them making a change at this late stage. We've seen it obviously at Watford last season. I think we've seen it. Nothing surprises you in football. I think it would be a mistake for Palace to get rid of Roy Hodgson because he has done a decent job there. Stabilised them. Yeah, they're having a difficult period at the moment, but I think if they can get Zaha back fit, that will give them an extra dimension. They've got a bit of a cushion at the moment, but they can't afford to slip any closer to the bottom 3. And certainly, the form Fulham are in, and with Newcastle, I think playing Manchester United on Sunday. If Fulham can get a result in the next couple of games, a win and a draw possibly, then and Palace don't, get a win or so, then Newcastle and Palace are drawn right back into it. So I think it's going to be quite an interesting one to watch. Certainly more interesting than the top end of the table, where City, as we say, are romping away with it.
Simon, bottom 3 as they stand going down?
No, I think Fulham. I think Fulham can get out of it. They've brought Josh Maguire in, who's looks quite lively. He scored a couple of goals at Everton. I think they look like a team who's really well organised, but also carry a threat at the other end. And I look at somebody like Newcastle, for example. Callum Wilson's injured. If Callum Wilson's not scoring for Newcastle, not many other players do. I mean, Andy Carroll's not going to score the goals that keep Newcastle out of the bottom 3. And you look at Palace, and it's interesting with Roy Hodgson. Roy's big quality was always defensive organisation. And I watched them the game against Burnley, and they were absolutely all over the place, which is very unlike a Roy Hodgson team. They've always relied on keeping things tight at one end and looking for a bit of Wilfried Zaha magic at the other. With Zaha missing, they just don't look like a team that can score goals. I mean, I don't know how long he's going to be out for, whether it's a long-term thing, but they need him back very quickly. I think Newcastle, for me, which is a shame because I love going up to St James's Park, and we all know what great fans and what a great club they are, but they just look like a team that's in free fall at the moment to me. And I think Fulham have got the capability of clawing them back in. And I think Newcastle might be the one that goes.
I agree. I think Scott Parker has got a lot about him, actually. I think, they're a bit more organised now. I think Anderson has made a big difference defensively. They look reasonably solid. So hopefully, anyway, it would be good. I think what I really do hope that one of those bottom 3, and I suspect it will be Fulham, make a run, because I think what we don't want is for the bottom 3 to be cut adrift with, say, 10 games to go. Because then you would get, I think, a sort of a bunch of teams above them who aren't going down, but who haven't got Europe to fight for, who will basically, without the crowds and in this peculiar environment, will just go through the motions. I think you get a lot of games. I'm already seeing the odd game when I'm looking at teams. I'm thinking, well, you know what? There's no jeopardy involved here. You're not going to get any flack from the crowd because there isn't one there. You're not going down, and you're not challenging for anything significant. So you're going through the motions. And I just hope then that will change if Fulham can go up. Steve, I didn't mean to mention while we were on the European and the Messi chat, but we sort of got a bit involved with Messi. Talking of successors to Messi, long term, as in Ballon d'Or winners, global superstars, and Messi was on the field to have a view of one of them. An incredible week, I mentioned at the start, for Mbappe and for Haaland. I mean, these are just 2 examples of 2 sensational players in Europe right at this moment. Mbappe, incredible hat-trick.
Yeah, I mean, we've known about Mbappe for a long time, haven't we? But I think it was definitely a coming-of-age performance, as a lot of people kind of tagged that the other night. It was, I have to say, I I think there's a lot of strikers, maybe at Premier League clubs, that would have taken advantage of that Barcelona defence.
Yes,
it was truly shocking. But the way Mbappe dismantled them was fantastic, and no real surprise. I mean, he's got pace to burn, hasn't he? But what I noticed about him, and what I hadn't seen before in his game, his finishing ability and the way he takes his time and he's clinical in his finishing was, for me, because I've not studied him a lot lately, I was just like going on what I'd seen in the past from him, and I felt that sometimes he got into good positions but didn't really convert. I thought his ruthlessness was off the scale the other night against Barcelona. Yes. He definitely made sure that he converted those chances. They weren't easy chances either. They were difficult chances, and he converted them. As for Haaland, well, you know, we know what he can do. I mean, his ability is again on a super high level, the same as Mbappe. Different type of player, of course, but still got all the attributes and knows where the goal is. And you know, when you think about what John Terry said about Grealish and Foden being the best two, listen, you've got to put those two above them at this minute in time, because they are players that would absolutely grace any league in the world, and it would be fantastic if one day we could see either of them in the Premier League.
Yeah, I think GT was trumpeting his own, which is fine. I'm sure he probably doesn't get to see a lot of these type of players. David, talking about Haaland there, Steve, is yes, we have known about him. Why isn't Haaland a Manchester United player?
Well, they're in for him. Certainly in for him.
Why didn't they get him initially? Why didn't they get him when he first left Norway? Why didn't they get him? You know, when he went to Dortmund and said, why didn't they get him sort of last summer? I mean, surely the contacts that Solskjaer has. I mean, I don't understand it.
Yeah, Solskjaer had conversations with Haaland, with his agent. He was convinced that Haaland was going to be a Manchester United player, and then United didn't like the way the deal was structured in terms of their dealings with Mino Raiola. We all know the history with United and Raiola, who obviously represent Paul Pogba. There was a question mark over, I think, the sell-on clause or something to do with the structure of the deal, which United weren't happy about. And of course, you know, Dortmund were happy with that, and he went there, and he's thriving there now. So I think, yes, certainly it was one that got away for Manchester United. Whether they will be able to revisit it and get Haaland in the future remains to be seen. He has a release clause, I think, in his current contract, which I think is around the 80 million or something mark. But I mean, that's obviously going to be, his value is obviously scorned. You know,
yes,
way beyond that, given his performances for Dortmund. I think he's got 18 Champions League goals in 13 games now, which is astonishing. I mean, he is, alongside Mbappe,
incredible.
You know, the kind of new boy wonder. I mean, there will be a host of clubs, you know, trying to get him in the summer. And you know, Dortmund are a selling club. You know, that's their business model, isn't it? They do produce players. Obviously, they haven't produced Haaland, of course. They've brought him in, but they will probably have to sell him at some stage. And Manchester United, as will Manchester City. I mean, they're both in the market for a number 9, for a centre forward this summer. They'll be in for him. As we mentioned, Barcelona don't have the finances to potentially get a player like Haaland. So it's going to be fascinating to see whether he stays for another season at Dortmund or whether he decides to take the plunge. But I certainly feel, in answer to your initial question, United missed a trick there. I think it was concern over the way the deal was struck, and that's why it fell through. But I think Solskjaer was certainly agreed that he didn't get him because, as I said, I think he felt he had him, having had detailed discussions with him.
Yeah, listen, I think that, you know, nearly every big transfer, every big player, you know, there's always plenty of people, plenty of managers, plenty of clubs with a tail to say, oh, we could have had him there, we could have had him then, we could have had him for this. I think, you know, it goes, there's almost no exception. People said they could have done it. But I do think that in the case of Haaland, you know, we all speak to people who, you know, clearly he's been on United's radar since he was a very young player. So I just think, and as I say, just considering the links they have, you know, I think they will probably regret that, particularly if Simon, what happens now if, as you know, they are forever being linked with a move for Jadon Sancho. Now, will you burn 80 million, 90 million pounds on Jadon Sancho and not go for Haaland? I mean, what it puts you in a bit of a dilemma, doesn't it? I mean, to me, you know, I think to myself, well, actually, it just doesn't, just from the very look of it, does it look the best thing to do to be spending a fortune on Sancho and leaving Haaland to someone else.
Well, I think that's a decision United will. Yeah. They clearly need a centre forward. Cavani's been has shown what a great player he is in the time that he's been given on the pitch, but he's not the long-term solution for United as a centre forward. They also need a right-sided attacker. So it's a case of, where you spend the money best. Do they buy another centre half to partner Harry Maguire? United have got a few little gaps that need filling, and that's not going to come cheap. Whoever they go for, I think the problem with somebody like Haaland is that if you sign a Mino Raiola player, you've got to accept that your club is a stepping stone, and it doesn't matter whether you're Borussia Dortmund, Real Madrid, Juventus, Manchester United. After 3 years, he will be looking to move that player on to another club. That's the way he works. That's the way he's always worked. Yeah. We've seen it with Paul Pogba. So do you look at somebody like Haaland and say, we'll take him for 3 years, and kind of run that risk that after 3 years his agent is going to move him on, or do you go for somebody like Jadon Sancho, who's made it clear that after sort of educating himself in the Bundesliga, he sees as his next step as a return back to the Premier League?
I think in that equation, you've got to put Amad Diallo, I think, because if as United suspect, Amad is going to really emerge as an absolutely outstanding world-class talent, and that is the hope at United already, having just seen him briefly, that's the view down there. I think that the need for Jadon Sancho definitely diminishes. And as Simon says, then, you're looking at Haaland, because, there's still question marks about Martial. There's still question marks about whether Marcus Rashford is a proper number 9 or best coming off the left. So Haaland would solve all those issues in one fell swoop. So I think Jadon Sancho probably is becoming less of less of a likelihood for United. But hey, we may all be wrong.
And of course, they've got Greenwood, who can play across the front line as well. So he can obviously play on the right. He can play through the middle. I think, as the guy said, I think a centre forward is really the most urgent signing for United, alongside a centre back to partner Harry Maguire. So I think, as you say, Sancho would probably be less important signing.
I guess Cavani is a very high class one, but is only a short term measure. Simon mentioned that you're then dealing with Raiola. One guy, I think, who was loath to deal with Raiola, or would be, Sir Alex. Now, I have noticed over the last couple of days, and I wasn't going to go there, but it just crossed my mind when Simon mentioned Raiola, thinking how Fergie and him did get on or might get on. And I have noticed over the last 24 hours that a lot of publicity for a forthcoming documentary about Sir Alex Ferguson. And in it, the clips that we've probably seen online featured his, rather tasty exchanges with some journos. Now, obviously, you three guys have all dealt with him very closely, and you can never have enough of Fergie journo ranting anecdotes. So away you go. I'll start with you, Dave. You must have seen that one. I think it's one with him with Matt Lawton, isn't it? When he writes about Giggs being out for the season, and Matt would have been on, I don't know, Daily Express then or Daily Mail. I'm not sure. And he lays into him. But away you go. You do yours.
Well, I mean, shortly after that, I think that would have been about 99, 2000. I started covering United in 2001, years after that. And
I'm on the
next 4 or 5 years, we had a separate briefing with Fergie in the little room, and the guys will know this, away from the cameras for the written press. And that's when all the juiciest, tirades and all the hairdryer really, came out because the cameras were there, so he could really express himself. And then, of course, when he brought in the cameras in about 2005, 2006, all that kind of went. So it was only off camera. So that was a real insight, that clip into just how fierce he could be. But the one I remember, I've just posted this on Twitter this morning in response to that, was before the first leg of the last 16 Champions League title, Real Madrid, at the Bernabeu, and it was Jose Mourinho in charge, and it turned out to be Fergie's last season in charge, 2013. And of course, in that press room at the Bernabeu, you're packed in. It's right in the bowels of the stadium, and it was standing room only. And there were cameras, lights, everything, hundreds of people in there. And I asked a question, and I was way off to the right. He couldn't see me, Fergie. And I asked a question, Mourinho's got a better head-to-head record than, one of the rare few managers who's got a better head-to-head record with you. What makes his team so hard to play against? And Fergie said, who was that? And Karen Cobbold, the press officer, said, oh, it's Dave McDonnell, because he couldn't see me. He said, I should recognize that voice. It's like poison creeping over my body.
Brilliant.
Because everyone's in fits of laughter. So he was capable of kind of moments of levity. You know what I mean? And humour as well as that fearsome side. But I mean, I did like Steve and Simon will, no doubt tell you now. We've all been on the receiving end, the sharp end of his tirade, and they certainly were some sight to behold. Definitely.
Was anyone there for the Juan Sebastian Veron? These were all idiots.
I was in for that one. Yeah, that was the day before Arsenal won the title at Old Trafford in 2002, and we'd questioned, again, this was in that written press section, away from the cameras, so obviously this wasn't caught on film. But at the end of that season, where they paid, I think, 28 million, paid Lazio 28 million for Veron, and he, apart from that one great game against Everton, I think the 4-1 at Old Trafford, August, September, he hadn't really justified his price tag. And so we started getting to Fergie about Veron, and he just, you could see the kind of the face turning red, and he ended with the immortal line, "Veron's a great player. User, yes." That was it. He stormed out.
And with that, flounced off.
And then Arsenal won the title at Old Trafford. I think they won 1-0. I think Wiltord scored the goal, and that was it. But yeah, that was the famous one. I mean, there've been plenty of others. Off camera, most of them off camera down the years.
Steve,
certainly something to behold.
Steve, you were in at the ground floor, pal. I would have thought in from the very day one.
Yeah, absolutely.
First ever Fergie bollocking,
and that was in the early days. People I don't think appreciate how intensely driven and fiery and confrontational and aggressive he was. If anybody stood in his way or mentioned anything about his team, even in the early days when the team was clearly not the team he wanted to end up with, he was just fierce. I've been thrown out the training ground. I've been banned for days, weeks, months by him. So I've run that whole gamut, as a lot of us have. But the best, without a shadow of a doubt, the best kind of Fergie meltdown I've ever seen was at the Cliff before they moved to the Carrington training ground. So I'm going back many years. It was probably 2, 3, 4 years after he'd, around about the 1990s, I would say, before they left Carrington. And you'll all remember David Meek, who was on the Manchester Evening News for many years, covered United since the Munich air disaster. And David obviously used to do all the programme notes for all the managers, from Sir Matt Busby onwards, and did Ferguson's programme notes. So he and Alex Ferguson had quite a good relationship. And because he was an evening paper guy in those days, he was down at the Cliff every day. And I remember being at the Cliff one Friday morning, and I could hear this almighty row going on upstairs. And I saw David Meek emerge, come down the stairs, and with Fergie still bellowing at him from the stairs, telling him he was banned, he'd written some rubbish story, whatever, don't ring him again, blah, blah, blah. And then David came down the stairs and kind of walked out into the car park. And I was stood downstairs in the reception area at the Cliff, because I think in those days I was doing some work for the programme. So I was doing sort of interviews so I could get behind the scenes a little bit. Fergie put a stop to that, by the way, pretty soon. But the door slammed with an almighty slam, and there was kind of a silence, and people were kind of raising their eyebrows that Fergie had gone off on one again. David Meek was walking out into the car park back to his car. All of a sudden, the door bursts open. Fergie comes running down the stairs, shouting, "David!" And this was in sort of mid-late December at the time, just before Christmas. And he comes running down the stairs out into the car park. He goes, David. So David Meek, who's been on the end of this ferocious rollicking off Fergie, turns round and Fergie goes, "Happy Christmas," and then walks back in the building, back upstairs to his office. So, just there was a lot of humour and kind of funniness around some of those rollickings. It weren't funny if you were on the end of them, but there was a humorous element to some of them.
Simon, any paths crossed with Sir Alex?
Yeah, quite a few, including one that got me a 2.5-year ban from the training ground.
2.5 years.
He was quite.
Mind you, I think I'm still banned.
But my best Fergie story is actually a kind of example of how kind of helpful he could be to young journalists. And it was I was working for the Press Association at the time, and Steve mentions David Meek there. David had done a book on Sir Alex Ferguson. I think it's called, was it called Managing My Year or Managing My Life? It was the first book that Sir Alex had done. And I was given a one-on-one interview with him at Old Trafford. We went into one of the executive boxes, and part of the book was how he banned another local journalist called Paul Ince from covering the club, because Paul had claimed that Alex was about to retire. So this was in the book. So I actually said to Alex, look, you mentioned that retirement's not in your mind at the moment. What kind of time are you looking at? And he gave me this kind of 10-minute sort of talking about that he was going to retire at the age of 65 in 2002. It was the one where he eventually had a U-turn, but he knew what he was doing, giving me that story. I worked for the Press Association at the time, and the story went on the wires. It was on the back page of every national newspaper the next morning. And sure enough, a couple of days later, I got a telephone call off the sports editor of a national newspaper offering me a job. And he knew what he was doing, giving me that information and giving me that it was gold dust. And sure enough, when I covered my first Manchester United press conference as a national newspaper journalist, he kind of, gave me a little bit of a knowing smile, because he knew what kind of role he played in kind of opening the door for me. And he could be ferocious, like Steve says, but there were times when he kind of he didn't mind opening a door or two for people, and I thought that was great.
It is, pal. The soft side of Fergie to finish with, I think, guys. I was going to go on to the referee, but I think those anecdotes of Sir Alex, and it should make fascinating viewing the documentary. I'm going to say, Sam, so he sent you on the road to stardom, but also banned you for 2.5 years.
Yeah, 2.5-year ban.
That probably just about sums him up, doesn't it, really? The same way as that story about him having to go at Meekie and then Happy Christmas, Dave. Just about sums it up. Guys, I'm going to leave it there because I think they're perfect stories to end it on. I say we'll all look forward to seeing that documentary. Thanks very much for today, for your contributions, and thanks very much to anyone who's watching or listening. And we'll see you and speak to you next week. Thanks.
Thank you.